remember me when you hear some of these days.
Child labor laws. Concern for the conditions of the poor lead to a growing interest in the rights of the working class. One of the main causes of progressive era reformers was child labor reform. In 1890, there were more than 1 million children, 10 to 15 years old, worked in America. That number went up to 2 million by 1910. Industries employ children as young as 5 or 6 to work as many as 18 to 20 hours a day. There were many hazards in the jobs. Young children sat on boards in cramped positions, breathing heavy dust, sifting through coal. Industrialization did not create child labor, but it did contribute to the need for child labor reform. The replacement of skilled artisans by machinery and the growth of factories and mills made child labor increasingly profitable for businesses. Many employers prefer hiring children because they were quick, easy to train, and were willing to work for no wages. Progressive era reformers believed that child labor was detrimental to children and to society. They believed that children should be protected from harmful environments so that they would become healthy, productive adults. Their goals were to make programs that would stop children's participation in industry and increase their involvement in education and extracurricular activities. While the reformers had an ally in President Theodore Roosevelt, politicians with ties to industry voted against any long-term solutions to problems such as child labor.
In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson approved and signed into law the taxation on employment of child labor. This placed 10% tax on profits of businesses that employed children under age 14 or made them work more than 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. The Supreme Court declared this law unconstitutional, but the idea of the bills may have had some effect on the businesses. As the number of working children between ages 10 and 15 declined by almost 50% between 1910 and 1920. The Smith-Hughes Act passed in 1917 provided $1 million to states that agreed to improve their public schools. The National Child Labor Committee and other organizations believed that these programs would offer children an alternative to work, but by 1929, every state had a provision banning children under 14 from working. 36 states had laws that prohibited factory workers under 16 from working at night or more than 8 hours a day. In February 1941, the Supreme Court overruled the 1918 decision against the Keating-Owen Act. As a result, businesses that shipped goods out of state had to go by ruling the children could only work outside school hours, and children under 18 were unable to work in jobs that were hazardous to their health.
So as you can see, child labor laws were needed because many employers were taking advantage of children and overworking them. So these laws helped give children the protection they needed in a working environment. There are many examples of hazardous working conditions. The Factory Inspector, unofficial journal of the International Association of Factory Inspectors, regularly published accounts gathered by the state labor bureaus of industrial accidents. At a steel mill in Butler, Pennsylvania, a heavy pot of hot metal spilled molten steel onto wet sand, causing a huge explosion which destroyed part of the plant. Hot metal poured onto the workmen, covering them and literally cooking them. 4 men died and 30 more were injured. A young boy working in a coffin plant was decapitated and had both arms and both legs torn off when he was caught on a shafting rotating at 300 revolutions per minute. A worker in a brick-making factory was caught in a belt and had most of his skin torn off. A sawmill worker fell onto a large unguarded circular saw blade and was split into two. And one of the worst accidents was in plain sight of 100 fellow workmen. Martin Stoffel was cut into small pieces at a Philadelphia Carmel works. He was dragged into a machinery and his head severed. A second later, both legs were cut off. The one arm after the other fell into the wheels below, both being cut into many parts. Before the machinery could be stopped, Stoffel had been literally chopped into pieces. Okay, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York City on March 25th, 1911 was the deadliest industrial disaster in the history of New York City at its time, and resulted in the 4th highest loss of life from an industrial accident in the U.S. history. The fire caused the deaths of 146 garment workers who died from the fire, smoke inhalation, or falling to their deaths. Most victims were Jewish and Italian immigrant women ages 16 to 23. The youngest were 2 14-year-old girls. Because the managers had locked the doors to stairwells and exits, many of the workers who could not escape the burning building jumped from the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors to the street below. The fire led to legislation requiring improved factory safety standards and helped spur the growth of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. So as you can see, job safety was a major problem that needed to be fixed, and many job safety problems began to go away soon after Theodore Roosevelt took office. Wages and hours. There are many examples of how wages and hours were being abused during the Progressive Era. One is Lochner versus New York. In 1895, the New York legislature unanimously enacted the Bake Shop Act, which regulated sanitary conditions in bakeries and also prohibited individuals from working in bakeries for more than 10 hours per day or 60 hours per week. In 1899, Joseph Lochner, owner of Lochner's Home Bakery in Utica, was charged making and permitting an employee to work for him more than 60 hours in 1 week and was fined $25. For a second offense in 1901, he drew a fine for $50. Another example is Mueller versus Oregon. In 1908, a major decision in the United States Supreme Court was made, as it showed both sex discrimination and the use of labor laws during its time. The case upheld Oregon state restrictions on the working hours of women and their health. Kurt Mueller, the owner of the laundry business, was convicted of violating Oregon labor laws by making a female employee work more than 10 hours in a single day. Mueller was fined $10. Mueller appealed to the Oregon Supreme Court and then to the U.S. Supreme Court. Both upheld the labor law and affirmed his conviction. The case was decided 3 years after Lochner versus New York. So as you can see, the payment people got was not worth the time they worked. That is why employees need laws to give them the correct pay for the amount of time spent working. And also,